A traditional literature review, sometimes called a narrative literature review, is the most standard one that you might expect to see. Essentially, the writer of the traditional literature review decides what to include and what not to include. In best case scenario, the writer of that literature review is a true expert in that field. They are aware of what research has been done, even maybe research that hasn't been published. They're just plugged into that community and they know what kind of research is happening in that area of science. They have been in it a long time, and so they have been able to see historical transformations of scientific knowledge in that field. And so they can make judgments about what information needs to be included here. They decide how to divide up the body of literature, to categorize them into categories that they know are meaningful for that particular discipline. So you'd have an author with true expertise who knows the history and the scope of that issue in the scientific literature. They select evidence to present, they review it effectively, and they arrive at an evidence-based conclusion. Those are the best literature reviews, frankly, that we can ever expect. However, some traditional literature reviews don't meet that high bar. Some are written by people who, for instance, may not know that much about the field. Think about papers that college students write as part of their education. As an academic exercise, this is fine, where an instructor will say, find literature on this topic and write it up in a literature review. So you might be choosing the articles that you find, maybe the ones that were easiest for you to find, maybe the ones that you found first. But you don't have the true scope of the discipline. And so what ends up in your literature review might be limited, and that could be a serious problem. Another thing that sometimes happens, even with experienced academics or scholars, is that they have a predetermined conclusion. They have a result that they want, that they believe in, and therefore they just pick studies to include that support their conclusion, rather than doing it the other way around, where you start with the evidence and you arrive at the conclusion. No, they start with the conclusion and find evidence to fit that. Now, that's a worst case scenario. How is the reader to determine which kind of traditional literature review you're reading? It's hard unless you are also an expert in the field. I want to illustrate something that happens when there is not true consensus in the field. I want to show you two traditional literature reviews written on a very similar topic, but arriving at completely different conclusions. This one here is written by Jim McKenna. He is an anthropologist who's been studying mother-infant co-sleeping in cultural context, and concludes, as you can see here, babies should never sleep alone. A review of the co-sleeping controversy in relation to SIDS, bed sharing, and breastfeeding. Now, he is a true expert in this field. He knows the research very well, and in his opinion, this is the conclusion that it yields. Another traditional literature review on a very similar topic, this is by Peter Fleming, Bed Sharing and Unexpected Infant Deaths. What is the relationship? And notice that the title of this one includes some ambiguity. He's not saying, or these authors collectively are not saying, that bed sharing causes infant deaths, but they're also not saying that bed sharing is safe, because these authors have some concern about that. They present essentially evidence from the medical field. Now, the one we just talked about, Jim McKenna, he's an anthropologist, and he's presenting research from more cultural and social research, whereas these folks are presenting epidemiological and medical research, and they're arriving at somewhat different conclusions. And this, but both of them are very good traditional review articles. The truth here is that there is no scientific consensus on this question yet, and that's why our traditional literature reviews are giving us different answers.